We are live. So, hello everybody. It's Alison. This group used to be known as the Moms with IC group. We changed it this morning, so I'm always having to now scroll back to see what I ended up calling this group. We're here with Dr. Dufour, and she had joined us before to talk about diastasis recti and interstitial cystitis, so I've invited her back. There was a lot of information about the nervous system in there. And I wanted to dive deeper into that topic today. So I invited her back to come and talk to us about like how our feelings, like anxiety, fear, like negative stress, like any kind of negative feeling and how that can impact our symptoms. So you might be here, you might have come here with IC, vulvodynia, or any of the things that come along with that, maybe fibromyalgia, IBS, etc. We're here to provide hope and tips, etc. And I'll let Dr. Dufour introduce herself as well, and tell us about the lovely things that she's up to and what she does, and then we'll get into a conversation about our emotions and how that can affect our symptoms.
Super. Well, thank you so much, Alison, and hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm Sinead, and I am an academic clinician. So I sort of spend half my time at McMaster University in the Faculty of Health Science, teaching, doing research. I span the School of Nursing, the School of Medicine, the School of Rehabilitation Science, a real sort of interprofessional sort of perspective there, which is great. And then clinically, I am one of the partners in The Womb, The World of My Baby, where there's certainly an emphasis on perinatal care. We have multiple sites across Ontario, but I also run my own very busy practice out of one of the locations in Burlington as a pelvic health physiotherapist. So I very much do run my own practice. I interface with women like all of you every single day. And so it's kind of really through my research teaching, but also through my clinical experience in the last decade, which has very much been focused in this area, that I've kind of garnered a lot of insight. And certainly when it comes to pelvic pain, persistent pelvic pain, which many of the conditions that Alison just listed would be classified under that umbrella. Like if we're talking about interstitial cystitis, painful bladder syndrome, vulvodynia, any of these things, even to her point, IBS, chronic constipation, chronic sort of myofascial pain in the pelvic region of the body. Many of those are really under this umbrella definition of persistent pelvic pain. We could put like persistent painful periods, endometriosis under there as well. Mm-hmm. And what we know about all of these labels or conditions is really that the common underlying pathophysiology is similar. For many of them actually have their own unique sort of differences and characteristics and phenotypes. But certainly one of the things that is common on all of these is something called a sensitized nervous system. So a nervous system now that is so much more reactive, kind of than it technically should be to conduct sort of normal, ease of functioning in your life. Mm-hmm. And another commonality across all of these are actually disruptions in the immune system, persistent inflammation, disruptions in your microbiome, your gut function. So we have actually a lot of commonalities across these. And another common piece here too, and this is where really we can start our conversation about the stress response system and the cortisol, the hormone cortisol, which is kind of our primary stress hormone. It's a survival hormone. It's a really important hormone. But when it's punching out too much, or if it's punching out and we really don't have sort of like the established resilience in that context, it can actually end up perpetuating dysregulation. So when we have sort of problems in our stress response system or problems sort of in the resilience of our systems, this can be one of the reasons actually why people end up, ending up with vulvodynia, IC, etc. in the first place. So we have lots of data to suggest that a history of adverse childhood events and how that sort of changes the nervous system, how, even if we talk specifically about IC, because I know historically this really has been an IC group, even if an individual, and many individuals who end up with IC or sensitive bladder syndrome, oftentimes this kind of starts off with a UTI, and a UTI that then doesn't clear. And there's really clear data that shows that it's kind of the regular sort of interacting now with the medical system after that UTI, when your body just didn't have the resilience to clear it. And then unfortunately being put on rounds of antibiotics, which is wipes out your immune system. And then that can kind of set you on a track for this dysregulation and sensitivity. So certainly stress response system is important actually in the pathogenesis and the etiology and the cause of, you know, these issues in the first place. But then of course that there is a role in the perpetuating symptoms when we don't have the stress response system managed. So I guess I'll just kind of say that to start, Alison, and then I don't know sort of where you want me to go from there.
Okay, that is awesome. That's a lot of good information right off of the bat. And I love that you talked about all these commonalities. I think a lot of these issues are things of elimination. So like people, when they're going to the doctor, right, it's like they rule out everything and then, okay, you have IC. Okay, I can't figure it out. You have fibromyalgia. You have this or whatever. So it's nice that there's a couple commonalities there, right? And some of these are interrelated. So many people have, as you said, so many different ones all together. They're occurring at the same time, I guess. And I find that interesting. When I first started off with myself, right, I remember I had like, I think maybe I had a UTI. I don't remember, and some yeast or something like that. And then after that, it, you know, vulvodynia and then IC and then all these things. And it can be so scary because you think that it's so many different things, but maybe there's like the stress and all that. It's kind of like people don't really think about it. So that's why I want to highlight it, right? Like what could have contributed, what could have caused. And I think I like what you're saying. A whole body approach is necessary, right? To help all of these sorts of things as well. So I want you to speak upon like the whole body response, I guess, like what should people focus on first if they're trying to, like you have a couple different things going on. You have IBS, you have fiber, like what's a good place to start for people?
Yeah,
in a whole
absolutely.
Body approach?
Absolutely. That's a great place for us to start. So I'm just saying that it looks like, honestly, there's going to be a delivery coming to my house in a minute. So I'm so sorry if I'm interrupted. We're like in real life here. But let me just carry on. So what I love what you just indicated, and that actually flows right into essentially how I'm going to answer your question, is how frustrating it can feel for people when all of a sudden they feel like they are tumbling down a flight of stairs, and now they're slapped with this label, and now this label, and now this label. And it can really feel like you're so out of control. Like now you actually have 6 different diagnoses. And actually the point is, really for the most part, it's kind of only one thing going on. And these labels are all just spin-offs of sort of the same thing at the root. Like if we think of a house plant, for example, right? And we think, you know, we might notice, oh yeah, one of those leaves is kind of going yellow. And then we think, oh yeah, I got to water that plant, or I got to get it outside, and you get busy and you forget. And then a couple days later you see, oh, now like there's another one that's kind of gone yellow, and that one that was yellow has kind of gone a little bit more crinkly and brown and whatnot. At the end of the day, like they're all now separate leaves that are showing signs of distress and abnormal functioning, because the same common thing at the root is not in homeostasis. The plant needs to be watered, it needs sunlight, it needs... So really your solution isn't approaching each leaf differently, right? I mean, if you did do a specific intervention on each little leaf, you probably would garner a little bit of like sprucing up and benefit, but that's not really where the solution is. The solution is one common solution. Get the soil good, get the plant into sunlight. And that actually then will improve all the leaves. And that's really essentially, I think, what the most empowering, helpful approach is when it comes to pelvic pain, because you are quite right. Most individuals will have the manifestation of multiple yellow or brown leaves. They have IBS and IC and painful periods and headaches, but those are actually all the same thing. That is just central sensitization. And so, if we can think about it that way, it makes it a lot simpler. And then that can sort of pave the way of where we start. So where we start, I would say, is first understanding, like what does central sensitization really mean? And how does this concept kind of translate into all these different diagnoses that can feel very overwhelming, right? Well, essentially, it's almost similar if we use the analogy of a guitar, right? So my son plays the guitar. So he has his acoustic guitar where when he strums the strings, right, the input of strumming the strings sort of matches the output of the sound. So if he strums the strings very gently, there's sort of a gentle output. If he uses his pick, there's sort of a different output. If he's plucking with his fingers, it's a different output, right? But then on his electric guitar, he has an amp he can plug in. So he can strum the strings really gently, but have the amp at 10, and it feels like it was a really aggressive strumming on the strings, right? The amp, the processing of the input is what's mediating the output. And that is the problem with central sensitization. We have this amplifier, this processing problem, which is making really mild stimuli, whether it's pressure on the mechanoreceptors of our bladder, that is now making the bladder think, oh my gosh, it's full, I need to empty, or oh my goodness, there's a pathogen there, it's burning, but it's not. It just has a bit of urine in it, right? Yeah. So it's this amplification, this processing, which is the problem. So really, our strategy wants to be to target the amplifier, to target the processing. So we need to figure out strategies to turn the amplifier down to get things into homeostasis. And that should always just be our first thing. So like, what are some of the key things that we know will dial down a system that's kind of out of homeostasis? And then it includes feeding in of the immune system, the endocrine system, our hormone system, right? Our nervous system, and of course, our stress response system. These systems are all integrated. And what do we know kind of nicely will dial them all down? Breath. Well, no, yeah, well, exactly. So breathing techniques, but I mean, certainly in a broader perspective, it's making sure your circadian rhythm is as optimal as possible, right? So this means we need to get exposure to daylight early in the day. We need to minimize exposure to blue light from screens in the evening. We need to be consuming food only in times when it's light out and not, so we're actually giving signals to our body about when it's night and when it's day. Like that is probably one of the most important things that people with upregulation can do. And I can tell you that from the clients I see, the circadian rhythms are predictably dysregulated in most people, and most people have very little insight as to how important it is that they switch those behaviors. So that's what I would say is the first one. The next one simply is time in nature. Time in nature with access, yes, to natural light in the day, but also in green spaces that are rich with microbes, different microbes that your skin's going to bathe in, that you're going to breathe in. That ecology, is really what is necessary, to normalize our immune system function, right? So when we're spending a lot of time indoors and we're not kind of forest bathing, that's a big problem, right?
Have you read that book, Forest Bathing? It's like a book.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a number of really well done, excellent studies, first out of Japan, but then have been replicated here. So, in fact, if you look at the microbiome research, and there's some cutting edge research coming out of Canada, actually, we even see the microbiome functions differently after exposure in nature and green space, right? So it's not a surprise that that's a really good intervention, because really it's our microbiome that drives everything, right? Which leads me to my next point is around diet. The information that our body uses, right, to make decisions about function is really, really important. And unfortunately, a combination of, environmental destruction and the food industry being highly corrupt, it's a lot harder for us to consume healthier foods. And once we are in a scenario where we have been pushed into the central sensitization, a precursor to that is a scenario where the membrane in our gut has become leaky, right? So we know that every single person who is kind of in this state of central sensitization for sure has a leaky gut. They have a membrane there that isn't functioning well. So it means, unfortunately, you are going to be sensitive to food compounds that some of your counterparts aren't. And so that's why really it's highly recommended that at least initially, individuals kind of go on what we call like an autoimmune sort of anti-inflammatory paleo diet. So you are not consuming some of the compounds that are much more predictably going to amplify and tick off your system, right? The conventional dairy, gluten, etc. Right? So diet is another one. And exercise.
I had a question on your opinion about autoimmune component, right, with the diet. But what are your opinions, I guess, of like a temporary icy diet? So like bladder friendly sort of food. So like taking away like chocolate, like tomatoes and cranberry, stuff like that. Like
like the things with the oxalates.
And then doing elimination diets.
So I think reasonably, if you primarily have icy symptoms and you don't have headaches or painful periods or IBS or anything else, then perhaps, and if you feel like in your life it would be more manageable to adjust the oxalates you're consuming, then sure, I think that's reasonable. But if I see label and overactivity in the bladder, and the bladder component is one of like 7 other things, and it's much more generalized, then probably it makes much more sense that you're carrying out a more generalized approach to get rid of the more generalized inflammatory components, right? So that's kind of what I would say about that.
Okay, perfect.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I just wanted to see your take before you went into the next point, and then I had mom brain and forgot.
Yes, no, and I think that's a great comment, right? Because certainly we do have the IC diet, and for individuals who are very, very specific to bladder symptoms, not the other things, I certainly think that's reasonable to try. I mean, people have a reasonable degree of success with that. Some people not at all. Some people, and I think the people who don't have a ton of success to that, it's because actually that diet still allows for some of these other bigger compounds that are disruptive to the immune system if they have broader kind of autoimmunity going on, right?
Yeah, and then it breeds inflammation. Like if you have like an allergy to like intolerance to something and you're eating it, then it like makes more inflammation in the body.
It will trigger a protective response, right? Because you know your body doesn't have the resilience to take in that compound, so it's interpreted as a threat. And in the state of autoimmunity, now that's going to amount your body to start attacking itself, right? And then destroying the tissues from that perspective. So you're quite right. It's really important that we recognize if, you know, we're reactive to certain things, that we sort of restore the capability of the system, and we don't keep dumping these reactive compounds in, because that's just going to snowball the situation, right?
Yeah, I guess another way I would put that is like, people don't think about internal stress, like in terms of like diet is like an internal stressor on the body. If you're eating foods you're intolerant to, it's like an internal thing that is stressing the inside of the body, right? Also kind of like what you put on your skin, could it go, you know, those sorts of things. Those are the things I changed, right? Like what I ate, the skincare things I used, right? Like I'm very selective with the shampoo, stuff like that, because I feel like it all is internal stress, right? Then there's like the external stress that comes from like, you know, you saw a dog barking at you and those sorts, right? And then you got stressed out, or you fought with your mom or whatever. So like the different layers of what can stress from the inside the body and then the outside sort of things as well, right?
Absolutely. So it comes down to what, you know, your body's organism interprets as threatening, right? So if you have a really great membrane in your gut, it isn't leaky, it's solid, you know, your system isn't going to interpret a gluten molecule as threatening. So you are going to mount no response to that. But if you have a leaky membrane, you already have low-grade inflammation, you know, there isn't good resilience in the system, well, suddenly that gluten molecule is interpreted as a threat, right? If you were previously bit by a dog and you hear a dog barking behind you, you're going to interpret that as a threat. But if you haven't, right? So you're quite right. Anything your body considers a threat, we start mounting a response to. And you're quite right that the compounds in skincare, so our inside membrane is our gut membrane that separates us from environment. Our outside membrane that separates us from environment is our skin. So we have to be just as conscientious with toxic compounds or compounds we are likely to consider a threat going into our skin as going into, our mouth and into our gut. So you're quite right. So we need to be thinking about that. And then the next thing would be movement and exercise. And it's a matter of understanding that as much as sort of vigorous exercise and HIIT exercise and these protocols have really good sort of health outcomes, when a system is sensitized, right, in that state, forms of exercise that produce excessive cortisol and adrenaline generally are not appropriate and not helpful, right? So people need to understand, especially if they're in a flare, right? That is not the time to be pushing it with exercise that produces cortisol and adrenaline. That is the time to definitely spending more time with more restorative exercise, slower walks in nature, but lots of them, more restorative forms of yoga rather than power yoga. So when it comes to exercise, it's really important that, when you are kind of not in a flare and your symptoms are managed and you're a little bit more resilient, that's a really good time to kind of up your game with your exercise, because you'll have sort of the tolerance for it without it flaring you. And that will help you to build more resilience, right? Yeah. But certainly when you're in a more sensitive state, that's when we need lots of restorative exercise. It's more gentle to the nervous system, but still exercising and not fearing movement. Right? That's really, really important. It's a matter of, there's kind of like an appropriate exercise at the right time. And when we're really sensitized, it's much more restorative movement that's much more helpful, right? And then, so I mentioned about sort of the circadian rhythm, the stress response system, the immune system, kind of all of those pieces. And that really is because that plays into, yes, the microbiome and gut health, but also this concept of our nervous system that you mentioned at the beginning. So a lot of the times individuals with sort of pelvic pain, or if we want to even be a little bit more specific about icy and painful bladder syndrome, since that's historically been this group, we really do see a pattern of individuals sort of living their lives in sympathetic drive, in the go, 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 go part of their nervous system. And that is a part of your nervous system that doesn't allow for recovery, right? It doesn't allow the amplifier to come down.
I always tell people you can either hang out in the parasympathetic nervous system where you can rest and repair, or you can hang out in the sympathetic nervous system where that's not happening, but you can't hang out in both at the same time, right? So that's a way to kind of look at that too.
Absolutely. And I mean, arguably, the majority of our lives are organized in the 21st century, that we have to get things done. So even if we're thinking, okay, so realistically of the daytime, probably 70 to 80% kind of has to be spent at some degree of this go mode. But we at least need some conscious, intentional parts of our day to be spent in rest and digest. And it's why it's critical that our circadian rhythm and our sleep is solid. So then we're getting some of that at that time as well. And again, this is where we can try to build in intentional practices, to your point at the beginning, of breathing techniques, particularly nasal breathing techniques that involve your mouth being closed, where you are really just sort of watching your breath, different techniques where you're modulating between a different length of an inhale or an exhale, or you're really kind of intentionally trying to get more oxygen into your diaphragm, right? The better oxygenated your mitochondria are, the better your energy system is going to be. So certainly breath work is one way to kind of get into that part of your nervous system. Anything kind of you do that is very mindful and in the moment can keep you in that system. So even if you were feeling a little bit too agitated or wound that you couldn't even imagine lying down and doing a meditation, the thought of that, because you're so wound. And that's what we find with a lot of our clients. We cannot start there. A goal is to eventually get enough peace and quiet in the system that we can get to that. And that's a sign now that we really truly are shifting the biology. But initially, oftentimes I'll have people think of things like when you're in the shower every morning, because if that's something you're going to do anyway, just maybe approach it differently. You know, when you turn on the water, like just really kind of notice like the sound it makes and try to be really in the moment with every single thing. You know, when you take your shampoo into your hand, notice what it smells like, notice what it feels like. Try to go through that whole procedure instead of mindlessly and on autopilot and thinking of like a million things in your busy brain. Use it actually as an opportunity to build in some mindfulness, to build in some time into your parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah,
right?
my friend, she's in this group, Priscilla. She does a visualization in the showers. Now that you mentioned that, and she imagines that the water is coming over her body and taking away her pain, and she's really, it's being released into the drain, and she has like a whole visualization that she does when she's in the shower, and she says it makes her feel, so calm when she's in the shower and stuff. And I did have one question before we moved on to the next about the circadian rhythm, for example. A lot of people, like in the group, because it was primarily moms, before I switched it this morning to like just women. So with kids at home, I found like I kind of took naps. So if because the baby might have been up, right? I have 3 of them now, but so is that still okay? So like you have disrupted sleep at night because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, whatever it is, but you also then take like a 2-hour nap in the day, or is that still helping with that rest and repair? Because a lot of people, like motherhood brings disrupted sleep.
So you're quite right that one of the reasons why we really see the majority of the diagnoses we're talking about hitting women, right, not men, is actually because of how, quite frankly, our society is structured. It doesn't adequately support a woman's biology when she has children, etc. Right? And so, unfortunately, how most people sort of live their lives, they have multiple kids, they don't have enough support. Perhaps there is so much sort of chaos and stress going on in the house that's now disrupting the child's sleep, and the child's not sleeping through the night, and so on and so on. Well, just because that's sort of how we've shifted the way we do things doesn't mean biologically like that is okay, right? So the reality is that we have pretty good buffering system in our own sort of biology and physiology for sort of like a good 6 months to kind of have disrupted sleep into that sort of postpartum period. But what we will see for those moms who their baby doesn't start sleeping through the night at 6 months, which is sort of more of like the biological imperative or would be getting close to, for where that's not happening, that's when we'll start to see the train fall off the tracks, because sort of the system's not there. And that's when people really start struggling. So it's those types of scenarios that I try to really do a lot of health coaching with my moms to help them figure out, well, how can we structure it so at the very least you have uninterrupted sleep at least between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. or 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. because that's your physical repair sleep. And arguably, once your child is sort of sleeping through the night, they should be at least sleeping through that stage, right? And there really shouldn't be a reason for sort of regular disruption. I mean, one-offs, but there really shouldn't be a reason for regular sleep disrupts. And if there is, and it's evident to me, well, that's more of a bad habits of sort of sleep in the house. I actually have my sleep coach work with the family, right?
I had to hire one. It's so helpful.
Yeah, because really and truly, I mean, a lot of the times people can come up with justifications of why there's a lot of chaos around family sleep. And oftentimes an expert can really, in a loving way, help you kind of navigate that in a more savvy way. And it's critical, honestly, for everyone's biological functioning, including the kids. So, I mean, is it reasonable to sort of make up for a sleep deficit with naps? Absolutely. But I think as long as the goal is, though, that you're working towards getting proper full night uninterrupted sleep, because ultimately that is what's critical for biological functioning. Right? But certainly making up for a sleep deficit with naps is better than not, but it isn't really a great long-term solution instead of getting good sleep at night.
Yeah, I remember I hired a I think the company was We Sleep, I think it was called, when my second one was born, because I co-slept with my first one that he wouldn't go to his bed for such a long time. Like, I can't do this again. So then she gave, it was very awesome. Like, they make you a customizable plan and help you to, in a very gentle way, help your child to sleep better.
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what our sleep coaches at the womb do, right?
Yeah.
And really all our sleep coaches are also experts in adult sleep too, because many women then get onto this habit of this disrupted sleep and hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is one of the features of central sensitization. So individuals with pelvic pain, I see, are going to be more likely to have anxiety and hypervigilance because those are spin-off outputs of the inflammation and pathophysiology.
Elaborate on the vigilance piece in case people don't know what that is.
Yeah. So when our amplifier is up, right, and we're feeling more urgency and more pain, and we're kind of feeling a little bit more anxious, right? Those are all sort of outputs of the amplifier being up. So one of the other outputs is something we term hypervigilance. And really it's like that hypersensitivity to, is the baby asleep? Is the baby awake? Is the baby breathing? Is the baby needs to be with me. I actually don't trust the baby to be with someone else. And unfortunately, then that ends up really making it actually a lot harder now for mom to actually get some downtime. Like that hypervigilance, which is related to the pathophysiology, then sort of keeps her stuck from being able to slip into parasympathetic mode, right? And oftentimes that hypervigilance actually ends up unintentionally, of course, setting up some dysfunctional behaviors around attachment and sleep, etc. Then that again then prevent mom from healing, right? So this is why really like mamas need to have avenues for counseling and support so they can start to help this. And when we're in that hypervigilant state for too long, it literally switches our biology that then once baby is sleeping through the night, we're so wired and hypervigilant we can't sleep. We're like checking the monitor. And then that now is an issue with sleep that is kind of separate from baby, right? So our sleep coaches actually even help work on that level with sort of insomnia that develops from the hypervigilance, right? Which is important. Like we need a whole family approach for these types of things. So it's really important that you can kind of connect with places that can help you that way.
Yeah, and I know some people in the group has come up as topics because people write in and say kind of what they're going through. A lot of people seem to wake up several times tonight to pee, so that's been something that has come up several times as well. So I always kind of recommend in those, right? And if you have other tips, let me know, to go see a pelvic floor physio so they can help with help them with that, so they won't do the peeing at nighttime, because some people like up to like every 15 minutes or every 30 minutes, right? Then their body's not getting that chance to heal as well. So I'm always recommending going to a PT to help support them with that, to get them sleeping through the night, because all adults kind of need between 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night, etc.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so what I would say about that, so I think that's a really good recommendation to have someone connect with a pelvic health physiotherapist, to coach them through some of those pieces. But I think the other important thing for people to know is many people think, oh, it's my bladder that woke me up. It's not. We know that what wakes people up are shifts in blood sugar and cortisol. And once you're up, if you already have a wound, sensitive bladder that reacts to anything, then you're going to be aware of that when you wake up. So the issue is more the dysregulation in the physiology in terms of why you're not sleeping through in the first place. And as far as kind of one of the things that keeps a bladder sort of wound is, incorrect habits of peeing and voiding in the day. So we never want someone to kind of wake up in the night, feel like we have to pee and say, oh, don't pee. Like, no, that's never our training. Our training is always at nighttime. You need to do whatever you're going to do to be comfortable and be able to kind of slip into that altered state of consciousness, right? But really and truly, if we have nipped the bladder in the bud with exquisite training during the day, and the bladder functions properly in the day, we know the problem at night isn't the bladder. We know the problem at night is likely an altered circadian rhythm, altered cortisol. And the first thing that altered cortisol does is it alters your blood sugar, right? And you'll get those blood sugar spikes, at 2, 3 in the morning, and then you're up. So once people kind of understand Like, you thinking you're peeing isn't really like the actual culprit. It's more of a thing that you're noticing. And then it's probably not helping, right? So I think that's really important. And then it's important for a pelvic health physiotherapist to kind of help you with any of the things in the peripheral tissue that are just making things more cranky and irritable, like tight tissue that's poorly oxygenated, a pelvic floor that's really, really tight. I mean, that's just not going to help, right? And that's more us working at the level of the leaf, right? But really where more of our powerful work is helping people to really understanding the biology and helping them to make the shifts in their thinking and their operating rhythm, because that's ultimately what's going to turn down the amplifier, right? So just even to summarize, we talked about sleep, we talked about time spent in the parasympathetic nervous system. That can be done through mindful breath work, that can be done through journaling and giving gratitude, that can be done through doing anything in a very mindful, intentional way, such as taking a shower, eating your breakfast. And then a graduation to that is what you said in terms of like an intentional sort of body scan or visualization, an intentional meditation, right? Those can be things. And then of course we have our diet, our time in nature, our movement, etc. So those are really like the main things. And I guess I would say is the last thing too, is many individuals who kind of like hit this point of dysfunction. And unfortunately, the postpartum period is a key time that many women first have an issue. And why is that? Well, it's the sheer amount of depletion that women encounter, that we do not have this appropriate structure for women to be able to recover and repair from that. So it's no wonder, like, we live in a biological mismatch to our environment, right? And we end up really paying the price if we can't kind of sort out our operating rhythm properly. The highest number of autoimmune issues pop up in that time, the highest number of these kind of chronic conditions pop up in this time, right? So again, you know, and then once women kind of are going through this, they've often already sort of lost a smidge of their identity because they've been pregnant and now they're a mother and now they're postpartum. And then they might shift on to kind of almost identify with all of these diagnoses. You know, I have chronic pain, I have this. And now that rules their life. And they step further and further away from the things that were really meaningful to them, from the things that really brought them joy and happiness. And that's really, really important, that from a value-based perspective, we are bringing some of those pieces back into someone's life. That's actually really important to create a sense of peace, ease, and safety back into someone's, you know, body. So that would be another piece that I think, again, isn't focused on enough.
Awesome. There's so many good tidbits in what you said, like just the whole thing I would say, but the summary at the end was nice as well. So for the people who are in Ontario, do you have anything else to add? I know that you summarized, but
yeah, no, those would really be the main things. I mean, it can feel really complex and confusing, but actually it doesn't have to. Like, we can really simplify it to the plant analogy. And if we can just work on some of those basics to get the soil healthy and kind of be supported, we can really shift the biology, and then all the leaves are going to get better, right? So yeah, really nothing else to add.
I'll add one tidbit at the end, but I think you touched on it in a different way, but just a different word I'll add to it is mindset is really important. When you receive a diagnosis of what all the labels, my friend, Priscilla, her grandma always said, like, you know, don't own the pain. You are not the pain. Don't take that and say, I am. You know, the I am is really important, and how you say that. So sometimes I remember for my own diagnosis, and it's a common theme. Sometimes women's pain is not, it depends on the practitioner you got the diagnosis from, how they approached you after. Like, I just had a nurse come and hand me a paper and ask me if I wanted some pills, and I was like, no, I'm good. And she's like, well, I can't help you. You're going to live with this pain for your life. See you later. Pretty much that was it. And that's echoed throughout this group and people I connect with in my DMs, etc. So if you internalize that and say, I cannot get better, then you're not going to take those steps, right? Because even while you're building your lifestyle habits, right, and changing, it's one step in front of the other, and you have to have that belief that I can get better, right? I am on the road to recovery. I am on the road to remission, right? So if your affirmations don't start at I am well, because maybe you don't believe that, but you can believe a bridging affirmation like, I am on the road to being well. I am on the road to healing. I am on the road to remission, or whatever. People call it different things. So I use all-inclusive language, whatever you want to call it, whatever rings true and resonates with you. I think that mindset piece is really important to implement all the things that Dr. Dufour was talking about. And if you don't have the belief, you may not take the first step forward or the second step, because you'll believe remission is not for me. And for me, you have to start looking at it as, if it's possible for Sally and Bob and Brenda, it's possible. I just use random names. Then it's possible for me, because it's proof. So all those pieces of all the people you see in remission, it's proof that it's also possible for you. All the people that, they didn't experience pain or anything like that for the last 10 years, it can also be you. Something my son said when my other son said, oh, I want to be a rock star or something. And my other son said, well, there's only 1% of people that make it. And I said, well, why, well, maybe, why not you then? If there's 1%, why not you? Right? And with all these interventions, there's a high success rate of people entering remission all the time. So ask yourself, why not you? It is going to be you. You just had to believe and take one step in front of the other, and surround yourself with a good team, get support. So that's my little motivational speech at the end.
And honestly, I love that, Alison, because that is so grounded actually in science. So we do know that our health beliefs drive our behavior. You're quite right. If you have a belief that, like, you're a medical label and this is going to require a medication, and you don't have the belief that your innate wisdom of your body knows how to be well again, wants to be well again. We just have to give it the right influences to be well, right? But if you don't believe that, and you believe your solution's in a pill bottle, you believe your solution is just destined because your grandma had this and it's genetic and whatnot, absolutely. You need to have the right beliefs and mindset to track the right path. You are so right. So I'm so happy you said that at the end.
And if people are in Ontario and they want, if you see people globally, like, where can people find you? I'll also put links in the comments below as well. Where can people find you?
Yes, absolutely. So if you are in Ontario and you want to consult with me, I do virtual care. I do in-person care in Burlington, Ontario, but I do tons of virtual care now since COVID. And if you live in Ontario, you can submit your receipt into your insurance. If you live outside of Ontario, I still see people from all around the world, but of course you then just can't submit your receipt anywhere. But I do lots of virtual care for people all around the world. So yeah, you can find me at The Womb, The World of My Baby. Alison will provide the links. You can book with me online. You can call into our fabulous team. But yeah, that's probably the best place to find me. And on Instagram, actually, I wish I could be on there more, but I'm so busy. But I often too am providing like content. It's a professional page. It's not a personal page. So providing knowledge and information. So if that's kind of something that's you're interested in the area of pelvic health or perinatal care, you can, check out my Instagram page as well, which is at Dr. Sinead.
And I'll post that in the links in the comments below, and then when I upload it to YouTube, it'll be in the notes as well. Perfect. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. I had such a nice chat. Right. It's I love talking about all these things, all the lifestyle things that people can do to really help themselves. Right. Because I think it's like in every kind of field, like whether it's weight loss, pelvic health, and all these things, sometimes we're looking for a magic thing that's going to help, right? Like in the fitness, you see like waist trainers, like, like it's going to make you lose all the weight, and, or a slim tea. And in this, sometimes it's just like, of course, medication can be part of somebody's a journey or something, but it's not the end all be all, right? There's so many more things that you can people can do to help. So thank you for highlighting all the out of the box things that people may not have thought about that is influencing and that can also help them to reach their remission. So we appreciate you and thank you so much for being here. And I will connect with you to get the womb link after. And thank you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Great. Thanks, Alison. Bye, everybody.
Bye.